You're listening to the Harmony of We, a space for remembering what we already are together. I'm Greg Kuiper, counselor, author, and fellow traveler in this ongoing field of being human. This podcast isn't about fixing. It's not about getting relationships right. It's about coming into resonance with yourself, with each other, and with the presence that lives in between. This is where the book Relationship, the Harmony of We continues in breath, in story, and in shared awareness. Hello, and welcome back. Over the last several episodes, we've been exploring something many of us experience in relationships, but often move past too quickly to fully notice. We began by slowing down the small moments where two people miss each other, not through major conflict or dramatic breakdowns, but through subtle moments. A comment that doesn't land, a bid for connection that quietly goes unanswered, a feeling that one person was reaching while the other didn't fully realize it. And then we explored what happens after those moments, how repair begins not through perfection, but through the willingness to come back, to turn towards something unfinished and say, I think I missed you. And in that last episode, we stayed with that part that's often invisible. Why returning can feel so difficult in the first place. The hesitation, the vulnerability, the uncertainty that lives inside reopening a moment after it's already passed. And today, I want to stay with what happens next. Because sometimes we do come back. We become aware, we reach for repair, we try to reconnect. And the response we hoped for doesn't arrive the way we imagined. One of the hardest things about relationship is that awareness doesn't automatically create reconnection. Sometimes we finally see something clearly. We recognize the missed moment and we understand what happened. We gather the courage to return. But the other person may not be standing in the same emotional place anymore. Not because they don't care, they don't want connection, but because hurt has its own timeline. And nervous systems don't always reopen the moment someone else becomes ready. Ethan and Maya are driving home after dinner with friends. The windows are cracked slightly, letting cool evening air move through the car. Streetlights pass rhythmically across the dashboard. Soft music plays low, barely enough to be heard. From the outside, nothing would seem unusual. Dinner was pleasant enough. People laughed, conversation flowed. There wasn't any conflict. No tension anyone else would have noticed. And yet, sitting here now in the quiet of the car, something feels unmistakably different between them. Maya is turned slightly toward the window, watching the blur of lights pass outside. She's not dramatically withdrawn, just somewhere else. Ethan notices it almost immediately because he's beginning to notice these things now. A few months ago, he probably wouldn't have. Or if he had, he would have brushed past it quickly, told himself she was tired or distracted, maybe thinking about work. But lately, he's been paying more attention. Not just to words, but to energetic shifts, to tone. He's been noticing the subtle moments where the space between them changes. And tonight, something changed. It happened during dinner, small enough that no one else would have noticed. They were sitting with another couple, talking casually about travel plans. At some point, Maya mentioned wanting to take a weekend away together sometime soon. Not in a heavy way. It wasn't emotionally loaded. It was just lightly, almost playful. And Ethan, distracted by another conversation happening across the table, responded absent-mindedly. Yeah, maybe when things calm down. Then he immediately shifted his attention back to the group. The moment passed outwardly. Conversation continued. There wasn't any awkwardness, no visible reaction, but something in Maya quietly disappeared after that. He can see it now in retrospect. The way she became a little quieter, the way she smiled less naturally through the rest of the evening, the way her energy slowly moved inward. Now, driving home through the dark, Ethan feels the weight of that moment sitting inside him, not as guilt, more like recognition, a growing awareness that what seemed small to him didn't feel small to her. He glances toward her again. The reflection of passing lights moves softly across her face. And for a few moments, he says nothing, partly because he's thinking, partly because he's nervous, and partly because he can already feel the vulnerability of reopening something fragile. There's a familiar part of him that wants to wait until tomorrow, to let the night in quietly, to avoid making the car ride emotionally heavy. But underneath that instinct, there's another awareness now, a quieter one that says, if you keep waiting, the distance keeps growing. He loosens his grip on the steering wheel and takes a breath. Maya, she turns slightly toward him. Yeah? There's softness in her voice, but also caution, the kind that comes when someone doesn't yet know what version of the moment they're stepping into. He hesitates briefly and then he says, I think I missed something earlier. The air in the car changes immediately. Not dramatically, but it's noticeable. The way it does when something real enters the space. She stays quiet, waiting. He continues. At dinner, when you mentioned getting away together, he swallows lightly. I don't think I really heard what you were saying. And then comes the silence, longer than he expected. Long enough that he feels the urge to rush in and fix it, explain himself, clarify, make the moment easier. But something in him knows this silence matters, so instead of filling it, he stays with it. Maya looks back out the window for a moment before speaking. And when she finally does, her voice isn't angry, it's tired. I don't know if I meant anything by it anymore. That lands deeply. Because underneath the sentence is something much bigger. Not just disappointment about a weekend away, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of reaching repeatedly and slowly expecting less in return. Ethan feels defensiveness rise in him almost instantly, not aggressive defensiveness, more emotional, a tightening in his chest, a part of him wanting to say, that's not fair. I'm trying now. I noticed it. I'm here. And underneath that, another feeling emerges, sadness. because part of him suddenly understands that Maya isn't responding only to tonight. She's responding to many moments, accumulated moments, moments where she reached lightly and quietly stopped expecting to be met. This is where old versions of them would usually lose each other completely. Ethan would feel accused. Maya would feel unseen. He would explain. She would shut down. And both of them would leave the conversation feeling even more alone than before. But something is changing now. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to create a different possibility. Ethan notices the defensiveness inside himself, feels how quickly it wants to take over the moment, and instead of following it immediately, he pauses. Not performatively or mechanically, but just enough to remain present. That makes sense, he says quietly. And even as he says it, part of him feels how vulnerable those words are because he's not defending himself. He's acknowledging her experience without trying to control it. Maya turns toward him more fully now, not softened completely, but listening. I think after a while, she says carefully, you stop knowing if your reaching even matters to the other person. The honesty of it fills the car. And for a few moments, neither of them speaks. Outside, traffic moves steadily around them, people heading home, passing through ordinary nights. And inside this small moving space, something deeply human is unfolding. Two people trying to find each other again, while standing inside years of patterning, protection, longing, fear. What becomes difficult in these moments is that both people are often standing in different emotional timelines. One person may just now be waking up to the pattern, while the other has been living inside the feeling of it for a long time. And that creates a kind of emotional imbalance in the moment. The person returning often feels vulnerable because they are finally getting it, they're finally opening. But the person receiving that return may still be protecting hurt that formed long before this conversation began. And neither person is wrong in that. They are simply arriving at the same moment from different places. Back in the car, Ethan nods slowly. His eyes remain on the road, but his attention is fully with her now. I think I'm starting to understand that, he says quietly. Not as a solution or as an attempt to end the discomfort, just as truth. Maya studies him for a moment, and something in her shifts slightly. Not trust exactly, but possibility. Because for once, he isn't trying to escape the feeling of the conversation. He's staying. And sometimes that's where repair actually begins. Not in fixing the moment immediately, but in remaining emotionally present long enough for something real to emerge. You may know this feeling yourself. Someone comes back after disconnection. They finally notice, they apologize, they reach, and part of you wants desperately to soften immediately because you love them, because you want connection. because you've been waiting for this moment. But another part hesitates quietly, instinctively, not because you want punishment or distance, but because something inside you has learned to be careful, learned not to trust the return too quickly. And that hesitation deserves compassion too, because nervous systems do not reopen simply because words are spoken. They reopen slowly through consistency and presence, through repeated experiences of being emotionally met. This is why relationship can never become only about communication techniques. Real moments are far more human than that. Sometimes repair lands beautifully. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the first attempt is awkward, incomplete, fragile. Sometimes one person opens while the other still feels guarded. And learning how to stay present inside that imperfection may be one of the deepest relational practices there is. Because the goal is not immediate resolution. The goal is remaining connected enough to keep returning again and again and again. So maybe this week, you notice not only the moments where someone reaches for repair, but the moments after, how your body responds, how quickly you soften, or how carefully you hesitate. And instead of judging those reactions, you become curious about them. Because every relationship carries emotional history, and every nervous system reopens in its own time. Connection isn't built because two people stop missing each other. And it isn't built because every repair attempt works perfectly. It's built slowly through the willingness to remain present, even when the moment feels uncertain, uncomfortable. The willingness to keep turning toward each other, to keep learning the shape of each other's hurt, and to keep returning with honesty, with patience, and with enough presence to stay. See you next time.